What if I told you that the greatest Targaryen who ever lived never appeared in Game of Thrones? Not Daenerys, not Aegon the Conqueror, not even the legendary Rhaegar Targaryen. I'm talking about a prince who combined the wisdom of Tyrion Lannister, the honor of Ned Stark, and the martial prowess of Jaime Lannister in his prime, all wrapped up in one extraordinary individual. His name was Prince Baelor Targaryen, known to history as Baelor Breakspear, and he might have been the king who could have prevented every tragedy we witness in Game of Thrones. Today, we're diving deep into the story of the best Targaryen you've never heard of, a man whose death changed the course of Westerosi history forever. Let's set the stage. We're going back roughly 100 years before the events of Game of Thrones, to a time when the Targaryen dynasty was still strong, when dragons were just memories, but the realm was finally at peace. Born in the year 170 after Aegon's conquest, Prince Baelor Targaryen was the eldest son of King Daemon II, also known as Daemon the Good, and Queen Maria Martell of Dorne. Now, this parentage is crucial to understanding who Baelor was, because unlike most Targaryens with their distinctive silver hair and purple eyes, Baelor inherited his mother's Dornish features. He had dark brown hair that he kept cut short, brown eyes, and a clean-shaven jaw. His nose had been broken twice, probably in the countless tourneys and battles he fought in. This un-Targaryen appearance would actually cause him problems throughout his life, but we'll get to that. Picture a man who stood tall and imposing, dressed simply in green doublets and brown mantles rather than the ostentatious finery you'd expect from a crown prince. This was a man who didn't need to prove his royalty through clothes or pageantry. His very presence commanded respect. He was everything you could want in a knight, a lord, and an heir to the throne. But what truly set Baelor apart wasn't his appearance or even his royal blood. It was his character. From the historical accounts, we know that Baelor possessed a rare combination of qualities that made him exceptional. He was described as being the heart of chivalry and the soul of wisdom. Think about that for a moment. In a world where knights were often brutal warriors who used their vows as convenient excuses, and where wise men often lacked the strength to enforce their will, Baelor was both. He could break lances in the tourney field and break through political deadlocks in the council chambers with equal skill. The chroniclers of the time wrote that few could doubt Baelor Breakspear would be a great king, perhaps one of the greatest since Aegon the Conqueror himself. His reputation for fairness, his open-handedness with his people, and his unwavering commitment to true knightly virtue made him beloved throughout the Seven Kingdoms. So how did a Targaryen prince with Dornish looks become known as Breakspear? Well, that nickname came from one of the most significant moments in Westerosi history, and it happened when Baelor was just 17 years old. The year was 187, and a grand tourney was being held to celebrate the wedding of Princess Daenerys Targaryen, Baelor's aunt. Now, tourneys in Westeros weren't just entertainment. They were political theaters where reputations were made and broken, where subtle messages could be sent, and where the pecking order of the realm's warriors was constantly being tested and retested. At this particular tourney, the field was graced by one of the most formidable warriors the realm had ever seen. His name was Daemon Blackfyre, and he was King Daemon's bastard half-brother, legitimized by their father, the infamous Aegon IV, also known as Aegon the Unworthy. Daemon was everything a Targaryen was supposed to look like. He had the silver gold hair, the purple eyes, and the warrior's build that made small folk whisper about the blood of the dragon running strong in his veins. More importantly, he carried Blackfyre, the Valyrian steel sword that had been passed down from king to king since Aegon the Conqueror. When Aegon IV gave this sword to his bastard son instead of his true-born heir, it sent a message that created ripples throughout the realm. Many thought Daemon looked more like a king than Daeron ever would. At this wedding tourney, Daemon was the favorite to win. He had already proven himself a warrior of extraordinary skill, and his looks and bearing made him the darling of the crowd. But then came the final tilt, and his opponent was the young Prince Baelor. The crowd must have held its breath as these two rode at each other, half-brothers by blood, though not by name, representing two different visions of what a Targaryen should be. When the lances struck, it was Baelor who remained in his saddle. The dark-haired prince with his mother's Dornish blood had defeated the golden warrior who looked like he'd stepped out of a legend. The victory was so spectacular, so decisive, that from that day forward, everyone called him Baelor Breakspear. He had quite literally broken a spear against Daemon Blackfyre, and in doing so, he had announced to the world that he was worthy of being the next king, regardless of what he looked like. But that tourney victory was just the beginning, because 9 years later, in the year 196, the realm would be torn apart by civil war, and Baelor Breakspear would prove that his worth went far beyond the tourney field. The conflict that erupted is known to history as the First Blackfyre Rebellion, and understanding this war is crucial to understanding why Baelor was so extraordinary. The seeds of rebellion had been planted years earlier by Aegon IV's deathbed decision to legitimize all his bastard children. This created a massive succession crisis, because suddenly Daemon Blackfyre, who already carried the sword that symbolized kingship and who looked every inch the Dragon King, had a legal claim to challenge his half-brother Daemon. The realm began to split. Many of the great lords, especially those who had never liked Daemon's peace with Dorne or who found Baelor's Dornish appearance unsuitable for a future king, rallied to Daemon's Black Dragon banners. Others remained loyal to the Red Dragon of House Targaryen. Brother fought against brother, lord against lord, and the Seven Kingdoms bled. The war raged for nearly a year, with battles fought across the Vale, the Westerlands, the Riverlands, and the Reach. Both sides committed terrible atrocities. Both sides believed they were fighting for the true king, and as the war dragged on, it became clear that the decisive battle would determine not just who sat the Iron Throne, but the entire future of the Targaryen dynasty. That decisive battle came to be known as the Battle of the Redgrass Field, and it was here that Baelor Breakspear would cement his legend. The two armies met on an unnamed field that would soon be drenched in blood. King Daemon's forces were commanded by several capable leaders. There was Brynden Rivers, called Blood Raven, the albino sorcerer who commanded a company of expert archers known as the Raven's Teeth. There was Prince Maekar, Baelor's younger brother, a fierce warrior who felt overshadowed by his more famous sibling. And there was Baelor himself, commanding a force of Dornish spearmen and stormlanders. On the other side, Daemon Blackfyre led his rebels with the help of his half-brother Aegor Rivers, called Bittersteel, one of the most dangerous warriors alive. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Daemon Blackfyre's initial charge was so ferocious that it nearly broke the loyalist lines completely. The fighting was so intense that reserves had to be committed far earlier than planned. Daemon himself fought like a dragon made flesh, cutting through enemies with Blackfyre singing in his hands. At one point, he engaged in a legendary duel with Sir Gawain Corbray, a combat so epic that it would be sung about for generations. But while Daemon was focused on this glorious single combat, he made a fatal tactical error. He stopped advancing to finish his duel. This gave Bloodraven's archers time to reach the high ground on a ridge called the Weeping Ridge. From that position, Bloodraven gave the order, and a rain of arrows fell upon the battlefield. Among those who fell were Daemon Blackfyre himself and his twin sons, Aegon and Aemon, all three dying within sight of each other. The rebel cause should have collapsed right there, but Bittersteel, proving why he was so feared, managed to rally the surviving rebels. He led a desperate cavalry charge, even engaging Bloodraven in personal combat and taking out one of the sorcerer's eyes. The battle could still have gone either way, and this is where Baelor Breakspear showed his genius. Throughout the battle, he had been maneuvering his forces of Dornishmen and Stormlanders into position. And now, at the crucial moment, he struck like a hammer. His forces crashed into the rebel rear just as Prince Maekar's troops, who had been holding the line against impossible odds, formed an anvil. Caught between the hammer and the anvil, the term that would be immortalized in song, the Blackfyre army shattered. The rebellion was over. 10,000 men lay dead on the field, so much blood soaking into the earth that the grass turned red, giving the battlefield its name forever after, the Redgrass Field. Baelor's tactical brilliance had saved the kingdom. His perfectly timed flanking maneuver, his coordination with his brother Maekar, his ability to keep his troops disciplined and ready while the main battle raged elsewhere, all of it demonstrated military genius of the highest order. But what came after the battle showed an even rarer quality. While Bloodraven, serving as the king's master of whisperers, advocated for harsh punishment of the rebels, for executions and attainders, and making examples of anyone who had supported the Black Dragon, Baelor counseled mercy. He argued that clemency toward honorable foes was not just morally right, but strategically sound. If defeated men believe they will be pardoned, they will lay down their swords and bend the knee. If they believe only death awaits them, they will fight to the bitter end, killing more loyal men and innocents in the process. After the war ended, King Daeron the Good rewarded his son by naming him Hand of the King, the second most powerful position in the realm. Baelor was only 26 years old, but he had already proven himself in both war and peace. For the next 13 years, from 96 to 209, Baelor served his father with distinction. He wasn't just a figurehead or a ceremonial hand, he was actively involved in governance, in dispensing justice, in managing the kingdom's affairs. The Meisters, who chronicled this period, consistently praise his wisdom, his even-temperedness, and his commitment to the common good. Think about what it must have been like to be a subject during this time. Your king, Daeron the Good, had brought Dorne into the realm peacefully after generations of bloody, failed conquests. He had survived a massive civil war and emerged stronger. And his heir, this paragon of virtue and capability, was being trained in real governance, learning the intricacies of rule, making connections with lords great and small, proving every single day that when he eventually became king, he would be ready. The realm had every reason to believe it was entering a golden age. The Targaryen dynasty, which had seen so many mad kings, cruel kings, weak kings, and incompetent kings, was about to get exactly the kind of ruler it needed. Baelor's marriage to Jenna Dondarrion was politically savvy as well. The Dondarrions were a powerful house from the Stormlands, and by marrying into that family, Baelor strengthened ties between the crown and one of the kingdom's most important regions. It also helped counter some of the opposition to his Dornish heritage. The Marcher lords, those houses that had spent centuries fighting against Dorne, were deeply suspicious of Baelor because of his mother's blood and his father's pro-Dornish policies. The marriage to a Stormlander noble house was an olive branch, a way of saying, I am not just my mother's son, but a prince of all the seven kingdoms. Baelor and Jaina had two sons together, Valar and Mataris, ensuring the succession was secure through multiple generations. Everything was set for a long, prosperous reign under Baelor once his father eventually passed. The realm was at peace. The succession was clear and undisputed. The crown prince had proven himself in every way possible. What could possibly go wrong? In the year 209, Lord Ashford of the Reach decided to hold a grand tourney at Ashford Meadow, near his castle and town. Tourneys were still the great social events of Westerosi nobility, chances for knights to prove their worth, for ladies to be honored, for political alliances to be formed and tested. The Ashford tourney attracted knights and nobles from across the realm, including several members of House Targaryen. Among them were Baelor's nephews, Prince Aerion Brightflame and Prince Daeron the Drunken, and the young Prince Aegon, who would one day be known as Aegon V and who was, at this time, a boy who went by the nickname Egg. Now, into this gathering of nobles came a hedge knight, a man of no particular lineage or fame, named Sir Duncan the Tall, or Dunk, as most called him. Dunk was a simple man, huge in stature at nearly 7 feet tall, but possessed of a strong moral compass and an unshakable commitment to the true meaning of knighthood. One evening, Dunk encountered a puppeteer named Tencel being brutalized by Prince Aerion, who was known for his cruelty and unstable temperament. Aerion was drunkenly abusing this innocent woman simply because he could, because she was lowborn and he was a prince. Without hesitation, Dunk intervened. He struck a prince of the blood to protect a common puppeteer. It was an act of incredible bravery or incredible foolishness, depending on your perspective. The consequences were immediate and severe. Dunk was arrested and faced execution for the crime of laying hands on a royal prince. It didn't matter that he had been protecting an innocent woman. It didn't matter that Aerion had been in the wrong. The law was clear. you do not touch a member of the royal family. But then something unexpected happened. Prince Baelor Breakspear, hand of the king and heir to the Iron Throne, intervened on Dunk's behalf. You see, Baelor remembered Dunk's master, an old hedge knight named Sir Arlen of Pennytree. Years before, Baelor had jousted against Arlen at a tourney in Storm's End and had unhorsed him after breaking 4 lances. He remembered Arlen as a good man, a true knight in the best sense of the word. If Arlen had trained this young man, if Arlen had seen something worthy in Duncan, then perhaps this hedge knight deserved a chance. More than that, Baelor recognized what Duncan had done. In a world where knights often paid lip service to their vows while acting in their own self-interest, where protecting the weak was a pleasant ideal but rarely practiced, this common hedge knight had actually lived up to the code of chivalry. He had defended someone who couldn't defend themselves, even knowing it would cost him everything. To Baelor, this was what true knighthood looked like. Not the pageantry and the tournaments and the fancy titles, but this, standing up for the helpless at great personal risk. But Prince Arion was not about to let this insult stand. He demanded trial by combat, and not just any trial, but a trial of 7. This was an ancient form of trial by combat brought across the narrow sea by the Andals, where 7 champions fought for each side. The last trial of 7 had occurred over a century earlier during the reign of Maegor the Cruel. It was a brutal, deadly affair, and Arion called for it specifically because he thought Duncan would never be able to find 6 other men willing to risk their lives for a nobody hedge knight. Arion would have the 3 knights of the Kingsguard on his side, sworn to protect the royal family. He would have his father, Prince Baelor, a formidable warrior in his own right. He would have other accomplished knights. Meanwhile, Duncan would have what exactly? Who would fight for a hedge knight against princes and Kingsguard? Duncan managed to recruit 5 champions, a mix of minor knights and surprising allies, including young Prince Egg, who revealed himself as Prince Aegon Targaryen and insisted on fighting at Dunk's side, but they still needed a 7th. Duncan was facing default and automatic execution. He rode before the stands one last time, calling out to the assembled knights, begging someone, anyone, to remember what it meant to be a true knight. The silence was deafening. None of the great lords would risk royal displeasure. None of the ambitious knights wanted to throw their lives away for a lost cause. Prince Arion laughed, mocking Duncan's desperation. And then a voice rang out, "I will take Sir Duncan's side." It was Prince Baelor Breakspear himself. Think about what this meant. Baelor was stepping onto the field to defend a hedge knight against his own nephew, who was the accuser. He would be fighting against his own brother, Prince Maekar, Arion's father. He would be putting himself in opposition to 3 Kingsguard knights who had sworn to protect the royal family. He was the hand of the king, the heir to the Iron Throne, a man with everything to lose. And he was doing this because he believed in justice, because he believed that Duncan had acted rightly, because he believed that true knighthood meant something more than blind obedience to royal privilege. Baelor hadn't even brought armor to Ashford because he hadn't planned to fight. He had to borrow his son Valar's armor and horse. Before the melee began, Baelor gathered Duncan's champions and shared his tactical wisdom. He advised them to use tourney lances instead of war lances. Tourney lances were longer, which meant they would strike first in the opening tilt, even though they weren't as deadly as war lances. He pointed out that the 3 Kingsguard knights on the opposing side were bound by their vows not to harm the crown prince, which meant Baelor himself could engage them without fear of being killed, freeing up Duncan's other champions to face the more dangerous opponents. It was brilliant, practical advice from a man who understood both the rules of combat and the complex web of loyalties and oaths that governed Westerosi society. The trial of 7 began, and it was everything you'd expect from such a battle. Knights charged at each other, with lances splintering and horses screaming. Men were unhorsed, bones were broken, and blood was spilled in the mud. Duncan fought with desperate fury, eventually using tactics that weren't exactly knightly, but were effective. He rolled into Arion's horse, knocked the prince down, beat him with his own shield, and ultimately forced Arion to yield and withdraw his accusation. The trial was won. Duncan was vindicated. Justice, it seemed, had prevailed. But as the fighting wound down, something was wrong. Prince Baelor, who had been engaged with his brother Maekar during much of the fighting, sat motionless on his horse. When they removed his helmet, a horrifying sight greeted them. During the melee, Maekar's mace had struck Baelor in the back of the head, a blow delivered in the heat of battle with no malicious intent, just bad luck and bad timing. The blow had cracked Baelor's skull. When the helmet came off, witnesses saw red blood and pale bone, and something worse, brain matter exposed to the air. Baelor touched the back of his head with 2 fingers, so lightly, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening, and then he fell from his horse. Duncan caught him, the giant hedge knight cradling the dying prince. According to witnesses, Duncan kept saying, "Up, up, up," just as he had with his horse earlier in the tourney, as if sheer will could make the prince rise. But Baelor Breakspear did not rise. He died there in Duncan's arms, the man who had defended him, the man he had sacrificed everything to protect. The greatest prince of his generation, the heir who could have been the best king since Aegon the Conqueror, was dead at 39 years old, killed accidentally by his own brother in a trial that should never have happened. The consequences of this single death cannot be overstated. At Baelor's funeral, his son Valar said that his father could have been the greatest king since Aegon the Dragon, and he asked why the gods took him and left Duncan. It's a question that echoes through history. Prince Maekar was devastated, haunted by guilt, even though everyone knew it was an accident. For the rest of his life, Maekar observed the anniversary of his brother's death every single year, marked by the knowledge that his blow had killed the best of them. Within a year of Baelor's death, disaster struck again. The Great Spring Sickness swept through Westeros, a plague that killed tens of thousands. Among the dead were both of Baelor's sons, Valar and Mataris, eliminating the direct line of succession. King Daemon the Good also perished in the plague. With Baelor and his sons gone, the crown passed to Daemon's second son, Aerys the First, a bookish man more interested in his studies than in ruling. Aerys never married, never had children, and his reign was marked by ineffectual leadership. He appointed Bloodraven as his hand, and the sorcerer ruled with an iron fist, using informants and spies to maintain control through fear rather than love. When Aerys died, the crown passed to Maekar, the brother whose mace had killed Baelor. Maekar was a capable warrior and not a bad king, but he was harsh, impatient, and forever haunted by his brother's death. He died in combat suppressing a rebellion. After Maekar came his son Aegon V, the same egg who had fought in the Trial of Seven as a boy. Aegon V tried to be a good king, tried to implement reforms that would help the small folk, but he faced constant opposition from the nobility. His reign ended in the tragedy at Summerhall, a mysterious disaster involving wildfire and a failed attempt to bring dragons back into the world. From Aegon V, the crown passed through a series of increasingly unstable monarchs, Jaehaerys II, and then Aerys II, the Mad King, whose reign ended in Robert's Rebellion and the near extinction of House Targaryen. Every step of the way, you can trace the decline back to that single moment at Ashford. If Baelor had lived, if he had become king as everyone expected, the history of Westeros would have been completely different. His wisdom, his sense of justice, his ability to balance mercy with strength, his military genius, all of it could have stabilized the Targaryen dynasty for generations. Instead, his death sent the kingdom down a darker path that ultimately led to the War of the Five Kings and all the horrors depicted in Game of Thrones. What made Baelor so special wasn't just his abilities, though those were remarkable. It was his philosophy of rulership, his understanding of what it meant to be a king and a knight. In one conversation recorded in the histories, Baelor explained his views on dealing with defeated enemies. He said that clemency is best when dealing with an honorable foe. If a defeated man believes he will be pardoned, he may lay down his sword and bend the knee. Otherwise, he will fight on to the death and slay more loyal men and innocents. This wasn't weakness or naivety. This was sophisticated strategic thinking combined with moral principle. Compare this to how most rulers in Game of Thrones handled their enemies. Joffrey, who delighted in cruelty. Cersei, who saw enemies everywhere and struck at them all. Daenerys, who increasingly defaulted to fire and blood as her solution to every problem. Even the more sympathetic characters often struggled with knowing when to show mercy and when to be harsh. Baelor understood that mercy wasn't just morally right, it was practical. A king who shows mercy to honorable foes gains more loyal subjects. A king who only offers death creates desperate enemies who have nothing left to lose. This philosophy extended to how Baelor judged people. When Prince Maekar argued that Duncan should be punished for striking Arion, Baelor's response was simple but profound. This man protected the weak, as every true knight must. Let the gods determine if he was right or wrong. Baelor didn't care about Duncan's status or lineage. He cared about Duncan's actions, about the choices Duncan had made when faced with injustice. In a society obsessed with bloodlines and birth, where your family name determined your worth, Baelor judged people by their character and their deeds. It's no wonder that Duncan the Tall, this simple hedge knight, never forgot the prince who stood up for him. The debt of honor Duncan felt drove him to eventually become Lord Commander of the King's Guard, serving Egg when he became King Aegon V. So why does Baelor Breakspear matter? Why should we care about a prince who died a century before the events of Game of Thrones, who never appeared in the show, and who most fans have never heard of? Because Baelor represents the path not taken, the what might have been that haunts the entire story. George R.R. Martin's world is full of flawed characters, people who mean well but make terrible decisions, or people with good qualities who are also deeply flawed. Ned Stark's honor got him killed. Daenerys' idealism curdled into tyranny. Jon Snow's duty blinded him to obvious threats. Tyrion's cleverness couldn't overcome his family trauma. Stannis' sense of justice became rigid and cruel. Each of them had the potential to be great, but circumstances, choices, and their own weaknesses brought them down. Baelor, from everything we can tell from the historical record, was different. He combined qualities that seemed almost incompatible. He was humble, enough to dress plainly and treat a hedge knight with respect, but also confident, able to command armies and counsel kings. He was merciful, advocating for clemency toward defeated enemies, but also ruthless when necessary, as shown by his brilliant military tactics at the Redgrass Field. He was traditional, respecting the codes of knighthood and honor, but also progressive, judging people by their character rather than their birth. He was a warrior who could break lances with the best of them, and a statesman who could navigate complex political situations. He was everything that Rhaegar Targaryen, often held up as a great prince who died too soon, was supposed to be, but actually delivered on those promises in a way Rhaegar never did. The tragedy of Baelor's death is that it was so random, so senseless. He wasn't killed by a villain with a grand scheme. He wasn't brought down by his own fatal flaw. He wasn't even killed in a war or a duel or a political assassination. He died in a freak accident during a trial by combat that he only participated in because he believed in justice and protecting the weak. One blow, badly placed, from a brother who loved him, and the future of Westeros changed forever. In the end, Baelor Breakspear's story is about more than just one exceptional man. It's about how history hangs on single moments, single decisions, single accidents. It's about how the absence of good leadership creates a vacuum that lesser men fill, often with disastrous results. It's about how a society that values birth over merit, tradition over justice, and pride over pragmatism wastes its best people. Most of all, it's about how we remember and honor those who try to do the right thing, even when the world makes it incredibly difficult. If Baelor had lived, if he had become King Baelor II, would there have been a Dance of the Dragons aftermath to contend with generations later? Would the Targaryen dynasty have maintained its grip on power, or would it have evolved into something better, more sustainable? Would the realm have been spared the Mad King's reign of terror and Robert's rebellion? We can never know for certain, but what we do know is that Baelor represented the Targaryen dynasty at its very best, the potential for greatness that the Dragon Kings occasionally achieved, but could never maintain across generations. When we talk about the great Targaryens, we often mention Aegon the Conqueror, who forged the the Seven Kingdoms. We talk about Jaehaerys, the Conciliator, who gave the realm decades of peace. We talk about Daenerys Stormborn, who tried to break the wheel. But we should also talk about Baelor Breakspear, the prince who was everything a king should be, but never got the chance to sit the throne. His life was a promise of what could have been. His death was a tragedy that changed everything. And his legacy is a reminder that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones whose stories end too soon, leaving us to wonder about the golden age that might have been. The chronicles say that few could doubt that Baelor Breakspear would be a great king, for he was the heart of chivalry and the soul of wisdom, and came to serve his father most ably as hand. But no man can know the will of the gods. That simple statement contains so much tragedy. The gods, or fate, or just random chance, took from Westeros the one man who might have guided it through the turbulent centuries ahead. The hammer and the anvil strategy that he and Maekar used at the Redgrass Field became legendary, immortalized in song. But the real loss wasn't just a brilliant military commander. It was a leader who understood that true strength includes mercy, that honor must sometimes be flexible, and that judging people by their actions rather than their birth is the mark of wisdom. So when you think about Game of Thrones, when you remember the wars and the betrayals and the tragic falls of great houses, remember also the prince who never made it to the show. Remember Baelor Breakspear, who earned his name by defeating a legend in single combat. Remember the warrior who saved the kingdom at the Redgrass Field with tactical genius. Remember the hand of the king who served his father faithfully for 13 years. Remember the man who stood up for a hedge knight against his own family because it was the right thing to do. Remember the prince who could have been the greatest king, but who died defending a stranger's honor. In a world of great characters and moral ambiguity, Baelor Breakspear stands as proof that it's possible to be good and strong, merciful and effective, traditional and just. He showed that the ideals of knighthood, so often mocked and betrayed in Westeros, could actually be lived and embodied by someone with the power to make them matter. His story reminds us that individual choices have consequences that echo through generations, and that sometimes the greatest tragedy is not the villains who succeed, but the heroes who never got the chance to fulfill their promise. That's the story of Prince Baelor Breakspear, the best Targaryen that Game of Thrones never showed you. The man whose death changed Westerosi history forever, and whose legend reminds us of what true greatness looks like. Fire and blood are the words of House Targaryen, but Baelor proved that sometimes wisdom and mercy are far more powerful. If you enjoyed learning about this forgotten prince, make sure you like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories of Westeros. Let me know in the comments what other stories from the world of Ice and Fire you'd like to explore. Until next time, remember that the best kings are often the ones who never get to wear the crown. Thanks for watching.